Hello everyone. In this record we are going to explain to you and discuss about chapter 6. This is related to the theory part of the INFS309. Alright, so in this chapter we'll be focusing on mainly the configuration of web server. Particularly we'll be handling the theory part and the conceptual part of of that concept, the web server. While we'll just leave whatever practical items and practical aspects into the lab sessions for if you have questions, and we can just handle this. All right, so without further ado, this is the overview. This is the outline to say of our course. So of our chapter this session. So first of all, we'll be understanding what is the web server, how web server works also, and installing Apache web server, examining Apache, also working with multiple websites and configuring new websites in Apache. In these slides we're just actually explaining the headlines, or the bold lines of the details of web server. While I really advise you to go into the textbook, and if you'll be noticing within these slides, I'm keeping referring you to the text book pages, some of the textbook pages. So most probably these are, whatever has been annotated here. If I have if I have to refer to the textbook pages, those will be the most important, pages that you will need to do. That you will need to revise. But this doesn't mean that you should just only revise these pages. All right. So let's just start in the first point. So it's about how a web server works. As you know, HTTP, it is the main responsible. HTTP is the main protocol that is responsible for client-server communication here. So it is about like browser and web server. So you are actually initiating a specific communication on the internet between the browser, which is the client, and then the web server. So it defines the information, how these information are being passed, and what are what are the requests to handle more than one page. So all of these are actually embedded on that kind of protocol. It is a very powerful protocol, and it's a very legend protocol, and even currently we have a new updates in this protocol, not recently, not now, but just since a little bit, before this, about like 6 to 7 years. We have a new updates on HTTP. Anyway, so there are two most important or popular web servers that are available in in the area here. The first of these is called Apache, and I think all of you is already familiar with that. While the second one that we are actually studying in our core study, actually even in the lab session, if you remember, we were talking about the internet information service. But there will be actually a lab session that will be dedicated for Apache throughout our course. All right, so now we have Apache, which is from Apache Software Foundation, and this is an open source. We will be studying it actually in details. In the advanced slides that are coming within this chapter, and also the second one is IIS. So we can say that almost two-thirds, comparing between Apache and IIS, almost two-thirds majority of the web servers are actually running on Apache. All right, so the main purpose here, let me just maximize this screen, maybe for better explanation here. All right, so the main purpose of the web server here, it is to send an HTML documents to the browser. So this is mainly what is it doing actually. All right, so it is just to communicate, web pages, between the end user and then and the server, like this kind of interaction. So with that, HTTP should follow actually an HTML format for this document. So now here we have two concepts, or we have 2 points. In the first one, we were talking about the HTTP, which is the protocol here. I want you to differentiate in these two. This is the protocol, and this is the language of the documents that are actually being used by HTTP protocol in order to send the information. So these information are being formatted in terms of HTML documents, okay, that are actually being communicated over the browser. All right, so we already understood this. So it may consider, I mean, like the HTML, even it has a big line of evolution, starting from the basic HTML1 until now we have HTML5, which actually has more text and graphics actually. All right, so um, as is true with other services such as DNS observer, so also I mean like the the web server itself, which is the HTTP, protocol, it should run on actually a specific port. So without that port, we will not be able to communicate, like with the server, or even clients with the server cannot even listen to each other. So the default port for the web server, the like for the web server here, it is actually running on the port 80. For example, when I tell you what is the port that actually Apache is running on, you should know actually that Apache or even IIS, so as an example of web servers, they are running on port 80 by default. Alternatives here, there are actually some ports, for example, 8080 or 8000. There are actually even some ports that can be used if you want to configure further that, if you want to configure more ports, and these kind of, multiple ports are usually used when the server is actually hosting more than one web page or more than one website, and that server he wants to, run and operate these websites in just one time, in the same time. Simultaneously, we say. So we can use actually any number beyond the port, or like beyond that value, beyond 1023. All right, so beside 80, 88, 80, and 8000, we may configure kind of special ports, but beyond the number of 1023. So each server has a root. So I want you to go to the textbook and also tell me, what do we mean by a root? So here it tells you where to store the HTML documents. All right, so this is a very important actually directory within the web server. So where the HTML documents, and not only HTML by the way, but those web pages document could be the JavaScript document, CSS style. If you have any other, if you have more detailed or more rich kind of websites, they should be stored in a directory called the root directory. All right. The current version of HTTP here, it is 3.0, which is actually in the 2013 variant here. It's just recently been launched. So virtually, but however, these kind of browsers, whatever browsers we have, because the browser actually, they are the one who are running, they are the one who can join, or like they can connect to the HTTP protocol. So meaning whoever developing the, those companies like Google and Firefox, talking about these two companies as the main company, the main organizations who are actually providing the web browsers, they should cope with the advancements of HTTP. And I believe currently even Google Chrome, or even Firefox, or even Safari, whatever internet browser, it is actually already equipped with the HTTP. So there's one important point here, is to understand HTTP is not a standalone protocol that you need to configure. It is actually a built-in service that comes with the browser. And with the server, as we have seen that, we need to install it and configure it, as we have seen in our practical lab just, little bit previously. So it describes, so this is the functionality of the HTTP. It describes the format, how to format the message that are being sent from the browser to the server. And I think this point we have already covered it in the previous slide. So here there is actually kind of characteristics that I can say somehow. So HTTP has some characteristics. For example, it's a stateless protocol. And actually this is not a main characteristic, or this is not the first characteristics. You may count this also as a characteristic. HTTP has a root. What does it mean by a root? You already know what is that. And second, HTTP is also a stateless protocol. And also there is actually a definition for a stateless. For HTTP being a stateless, and there is actually a benefit out of that. So whereby each web page is being sent independently. This is the keyword. There is no relation between the different web pages. The web pages that are being sent. Example, a shopping cart application using programming. And thanks to the programming languages that are available over HTTP, for example, ASP.NET, or JSP, whatever dynamic programming language, they have enabled actually the ability to have more independency of the HTTP communication. And with that, we are actually fulfilling the protocol being stateless. Second thing, it is about persistent connection, and this is a very important point here. You can actually refer to the textbook if you're seeking more details on both. In both characteristics, stateless and persistent connection. When we say HTTP is persistent connection, how is that? Explain that. So these are the points that are actually being thought of here. It allows the browser to receive multiple files from one TCP connection, or like from one connection in general. It could be TCP or FTP. Speeds up the connection, of course, because we are actually dealing with a parallel transmission and receptions. This requires less processing by the server. Instead of the server is being active all the time, it can be like active for a while, processing different services, and then being inactive or like getting into the standby mode. So a single web page in your browser may be combined, or it may compose of text and image files. So of course these files may be separated, or maybe could be like a link to each other. All right. So that's the second part of, the second important point that you need to know about HTTP, that it's actually how it works. And actually, if you refer to the textbook, you'll find a lot of details in this. And then I really urge you to, to go through them one by one, not only these that are being summarized in the slides, but actually more details that will let you to understand the process more clearly. Here, I'm just summarizing them for you. Like, for example, here, we are going to fetch the hello HTML from that web server. From Techno Widgets web server. So how is that? So first, it starts by the browser. When you type that link here into the web browser, and then the web browser actually connects the DSN, seeking the IP address. To find the IP address, the DNS returns the IP address of that server that the browser is seeking to connect. Then the browser, again, it sends actually the request to the server on the port 80, and this is very important. And here, this is the request. It looks like something like this. It's a get and host. It is both functions, get and host. Get, which is the, what kind of web page we are going to get, and this is the version of HTTP that we are running on, because it's very important point here. It's to tell the server, hey, I'm running on an HTTP that has a version 1.1. So if the server maybe, for example, is running on the latest version, so it can invoke its backward compatibility in order to run on the same version. And this is very important to make sure that the messages are being connected and communicated so clearly. Here, the second thing, this is the link. This is the link of the this is the URL of the server. Step 4 here, it comes when the server responds to the browser with the HTML message, and this is actually a formatting, a sample of the HTML message that can be replied. All right, so these kind of details, it's not for you to to memorize, typically memorize, or like blindly memorize. I can say it is just for you to extract what are the information that we are seeking here. See, this is the response. I want you to notice that the same version of the HTTP that has been communicating 101, 1.1 here, and then this is the the sequence number, and then okay here. Okay, meaning that we have initiated a healthy connection, and it's active. There's no errors here. And this is the server type. Could be IIS, could be Apache. All right, and this is that version of that server, so it's 5.0. However, although now we are having actually 8.0 and even 8.5, all right, but this is kind of like an old-fashioned message. All right, so here it is the type of the connection, or the content type, sorry. It is a text. And then also here I want you to notice this, the content here, the length of the contents in bytes, and then this is the HTML embedding HTML message. So it's hello world. It's just that simple text message that we are retrieving from that server. So we are retrieving a message, or like a page from the server that only contains hello world when we display it. So the browser retrieves the message and then reads it from the header. When it comes to the client with the browser, he retrieves a message from the header which contains the information about the web page. All right, so this scenario actually, the above scenario here roughly explains the process on how to do that. This is very important even for your assessment. You need to understand this carefully. Again, I'm asking this question. Do you remember what do we mean by what is a root of a web server? You need to really understand this. You need to really know what is it and what is it function. I will just let you to go to the textbook or like seek your own references to find the answer of that. All right, so understanding HTTP. Um, so here, this is like, all right, so let me just say that this is actually a typical copy of the message here, so we can just simply skip that, all right? But these are the information that can be contained in the header, right? This is like what the user, and like this is what the browser will have. I mean, like when we say this message, what kind of message is this? So this is the message that will be received in the browser. Typically the same message here, of course, because we are displaying it here, all right? That's it. So it's typically the same message. Okay, cool. So coming to coming to another point here, we are actually discussing the features of Apache server. So Apache, as you know, it is the major and the most dominant web server that has been used all over the internet services. And believe it or not, actually, most of the companies currently, they're even transferring from IIS to Apache. Why? It's because of it's because of the strong and the most robust support for that kind of Apache server. Okay, unless that company is actually seeking a full suite of a web server from Microsoft. All right, so Apache, we need to know that it has the latest version currently. It's 2.4. Okay, and it is actually it has been invented mainly to work in Linux. That's why it has a high consideration in terms of security, to say that. All right, so as a rule, from the rule perspective, Apache can work as a proxy server. What does it mean by that? It forwards a request it forwards a request on behalf of your own machine, of your own internal machine. So which means that we are isolating your machine from the real web server to the internet. And of course, that's why here we say that it has a high security level and privacy. So the current version of Apache here, it's called Apache 2.0 plus, which is like could be 2.01, as we can see, 2.04. And currently, I believe that even there's even a new release on that. Okay, so the main functions, the main features here that are accompanied within that or plugged within that Apache version, and more details can be found here in the textbook page. It's like for better support for Windows, because actually, although it has been introduced in Linux, but it has actually a huge support in Windows. It's because just it's an open source whereby a lot of community and a lot of expertise can actually join and contribute to that. So that's why it has a huge support for both Windows and Linux. It has a simplified connection, so it has only a unique and one way of setting a port numbers. All right, and it has a unique support. Unicode support for Windows, meaning that it can allow foreign languages to be in the web pages. Could be like other than English. When we say foreign language, it is that the language that it's those languages other than the main language, which is English, of course, the main language. And it has a header and error handling mechanisms for multi languages. Okay, so it supports, of course, and this is also another point, that Apache is able to support and work with many programming languages like PHP, ASP.NET, Python, JSP, whatever. Even more beyond the list. So there is actually a huge compatibility and a strong compatibility with these kind of dynamic programming language. Okay. Okay, coming to the second point here, it is, the other variant to say, it is the IIS. So IIS, again, it's to say it is a commercialized kind of a web server. Of course, you cannot get it freely. It's not freely available. You should have it embedded within the Windows Server. So, and because Windows Server also, it's also commercialized version of operating system. So anyway, you still need to pay some money to get that service. That's why actually this kind of service is not commonly famous, at least when we compare it actually to Apache. All right, but in itself, it is well known. Yes, a lot of people are using it, but when you compare it to Apache, of course, Apache should be like dominating more. All right, so it provides typically the same rule as Apache is doing. It is just for web hosting and web services. So it is just by itself, it is a web service. So both Apache and IIS, they are a kinds of web services. When we talk about, when they are configured in Windows operating systems, we call them as services. But when they configure, when Apache particularly, IIS actually is not configured in Linux, but when Apache itself is configured in Linux, it's called, as you remember, a daemon, because the daemon and service, they are both, describing the same term. All right, so IIS supports, even same as Apache, it supports both static and dynamic web pages. As you remember, static web pages, those web pages only that handle HTML only, doesn't has any kind of dynamic programming language like ASP or whatever other language. So there are actually many versions of that IIS, and it comes, as we said, built in with the Windows Server. For example, 2003, it has IIS 6 available until the moment we have IIS 8 or 8.5 in 2012, and even 2016. I think currently there's even IIS 9 that are available. Also, it has many services here, and we will discuss this later on, but I'm just bringing this to you. Like, for example, one of the main services here, it is just to connect or add different services in IIS. For example, you can add more than actually web services. For example, SMTP protocol, it is the main protocol responsible for email. For sending an email, you can integrate that protocol within the web page by using the IIS, of course. So it enables integrating different services other than the web services to work in the web page. Database could be database or like email service, as we have seen here. Here we are reviewing the features of the different versions of IIS. Actually, you can just refer to the textbook for these. I'm just summarizing them here, and I think, yeah, as you can read here, it is just for like 5, it enables the basic. When 5 has been introduced here, it enables those basic kind of functionality to enable a good a good ability of having a web service. For example, here, web distributed authoring, which stands for WebDAV. It allows the server to share web-based files. Also, virtual hosting, it allows, actually supports a good amount of sites to be hosted within a single IP address. Okay, and per website bandwidth control and throttling, Kerberos authentication for for security, and also again here another kind of security, which is SSL3. It is to give an encryption communication among, between the clients and the server. When we talk about IIS 0.6 here, it actually enhances those kind of, whatever features that has been lifted in 5 or has been accommodated in 5, they have been enhanced here. So we are talking about increasing security, permitting only HTML documents, for example, or per application, we call it actually per application access control. So it depends on the kind of application. And extended language support that can actually including XML and its web services programming, also including IPv6 and self-dependently. Self-dependently meaning that it has, each web page, it has its own functionalities that it doesn't need to connect to the kernel each time and to the core of the web server. All right, so regarding the installation of the web servers, of course, we will just leave that to the, to the lab. And I think we have already been installed. We will be able to install IIS 8 in our lab, if you remember that time during the very first time of our lab tutorials. But you can just refer to that back again, and we can raise a discussion later on if you still have any doubts on this. All right, so this is just a screenshot of the IIS 8 properties, typically from what we have even configured. If you remember that time during our lab practical, just in that. So major components here also in IIS. These are the major components that you may find in that screen. Okay, the screenshot, it has many actually under the hood here, but these are the major components when you talk about IIS. Here we talk about IIS 8 actually, or 6. You can actually find these in both FTP, of course, front page, and something related to the network, whereby you are able to create a user and forums, and also SMTP service for the email services, and also www server, which is the web server, the typical web server. Well, talking about IIS 8, which is actually the more advanced web server comparing to its variants or its previous variants and sisters. It allows actually more advanced server certificates using SSL. It has a lot of integration. Actually, the main I mean, like the main idea here, or like the main feature here, that if you can read from these points, is that about orchestration of services. What do we mean by orchestration? It means that working with distributed, I mean like enabling the web server. This is actually the main goal of IIS 8. It enables the web server to work so well in order to integrate different services to each other and can bring a high level of virtualization. Right, so here we talk about managing different users in the same, who have different sites. We talk about management services for enabling remote access and how to connect the server. How to communicate, how to control these sites from a remote place. Shared configuration also is about like how to copy paste, or like how to merge the particular script of configuration from one website to another. You can just read them thoroughly and find more details in the textbook if you wish that. All right, so talking about the Apache properties here, we have, the discussion here runs under three different aspects here. First of all, it's about the main configuration, or like the global configuration here. And second is about the main server configuration. So it configures the default. What are the default configuration and servers here? We talk about the control, how to control server in overall. And the second, the last one, which is actually the main and the most important one, and more actually detailed one, is about setting virtual hosts and how to work with different web hosting options. All right, so talking about the global environment here, it has actually some properties here. Like when we configure Apache from the global environment, we have some properties here. So here we have several properties. For example, server root, which is the main directory that locates the server files. So in Linux, this is actually the Linux path here. It exists in etc/httpd. So remember this. This is actually the main directory where you store your files in Linux. Of course, more details, again, as I'm just reminding you, you can refer to to this page in the textbook for, for more extra, for extra details and explanations. Well, keep alive, it is actually to indicate whether the server, whether Apache should maintain persistent connecting with the users or not. So this is very important feature here. It allows to download all the website associated with a file in one connection. Of course, if you remember, we were talking about persistent connection, so this is actually, of course, one of the features that we have discussed before. Well, there are two actually indicators here, or two thresholds: maximum, or like max keep alive request, to determine how many files that you can transfer per single connection, and the duration that how long that server can keep alive. Okay, and then listen here is another property. Of course, in port 80, this is the port number, so it determines the port number that we are listening to. So it could be because we understood, like we have educated, that a web server can run in more than one port, as you remember, 80 or 8080 or 8000, or even any port beyond 1023. All right, so okay, so coming to the to the second section here about Apache properties, it is about the main server configuration. It determines, so what are these configurations in general here? It determines the basic security configuration, default, and error handling, and actually other services. That can happen within the main server itself. When we talk about the main server, it means that main entity, or like that main host that is responsible for connecting different users to the internet. All right. We may have another backup server or secondary server, if you remember, and if you can actually just revise this within the chapter of DNS, because actually DNS and web server, they are actually typically together linked and actually involved with the same characteristics and rules. Okay, so these properties involve the user. To set the user, it shows the username of that Apache server who is employing. The default here is Apache, of course. Here, server admin, which is actually the list of email addresses. For example, root at localhost could be user 1, user 2, admin, whatever. Whatever the the email lists that can be provided. The server name here, also the domain, www. Whatever domain here could be like xyz.com .80. This is the port number. Okay, it shows either the IP address or the host name. Okay, so here it can be written as an IP address here, okay, or the host name in letters. All right, so document root here, it is a directory where the web pages are being stored. So var www dot slash html. All right, so here when we talk about, like, this is the second and the third part of the of the discussion related to configuring Apache here. So first of all, let's just let's just introduce what do we call by virtual servers or hosts. It is about the ability to create multiple websites using a single server. Okay, so meaning that we're actually want to use one physical machine in order to launch more than one website. And actually, in these old times, before actually, Apache is being invented, or to say even within the very beginning time of Apache evolution, it wasn't concerning about, or like it was not able to support that kind of virtualization. So which means that this requires actually a lot of hardware. It requires us a lot of hardware in order to run a website, because if like any let's say if like any client want to connect to a website, that website has to exist solely and lonely in one physical machine. But currently, with that ability of virtual servers, so it means that we can actually divide the server processing or the server functions in over multiple websites in order to be working in parallel and serving different users. So multiple websites exist on the same computer should be distinct from each other, meaning that they have to be isolated from each other. They have to be isolated in terms of the port number, in terms of the IP address, and in terms of their files and directories where they are going to be stored. So how is that? As we have explained just now. More details, of course, you can just refer to the textbook. To seek that. Okay, so actually, like even the how here, we can explain it from three sides here. Okay, so either hosting by different port, hosting by IP address here as a second choice, or hosting by a different host name. Okay, so these, this is how we actually, differentiate between, these are the three methods that we can differentiate between, between different websites. And moreover, of course, you need to understand if like within a single, within a single machine, within a single physical machine, you want to create more than a website. Of course, you need to separate their, their directory where the, where the web pages are being stored. You cannot like actually mix them together. All right. So, okay, so talking about the first one, which is hosting by port, as we are actually reading here. So it is to use the port number to differentiate between these, these sites. And this is actually kind of common, and it can work. But the problem here, so it is to retrieve this is how we retrieve actually the web page from the site using a port. So it has to be written in this way. And this is actually the limitation here. So writing that full, that full URL, it is of course a very high, it's of course a very highly prone, to be forgotten, meaning that we will actually very easily forget what kind of port we should use and even the format, how to write the port here. So that's why here it's not popular, in comparison to the other two methods here when we talk about, the ports. It's because we need to require the user to add a port number and we need to memorize it. So it has a very high ability that we may forget that. Okay, so the other option here, where it actually has more details to say, it is hosting by the IP address, meaning that we need to differentiate each website by its IP address. So of course we have to have a different port number, but we need to have also a different IP address. So a web admin or like a web server admin configures two types of addressing here. So whenever we are running hosting or virtual hosting here, we need to have, if we are running virtual hosting, we need to have one physical IP address, which is the, that actually reflects the network interface card in the physical computer, the server, and one virtual IP that is associated, at least actually one virtual IP associated with that physical IP. So multiple IPs here are being used to connect to different network domains here. Multiple virtual, multiple physical IPs, sorry to say that. Here, this is multiple physical IPs let me just I mean like stress on this here and add what I want to say here, multiple. Yeah, here I'm saying actually coming back, I'm saying multiple IPs here, multiple physical, should be multiple physical IPs that I'm referring to here. Okay, so let's just go back to the main screen here. Okay, so these multiple physical IPs are required to different. I mean, like, in order if we want to connect to different domains. So virtual IPs here allow using the scenario using. I mean, like, allow doing this scenario by using one physical network interface card. It's requested from the IP. So I mean, like, these physical IPs actually, how can we get them? It's actually being requested from the internet service provider. So so here. Um, actually, one of the most important, I mean, like, feature in virtual IP, it allows a high flexibility. It's because each domain here, it has its own unique IP address. Okay, so you can easily move one domain to each other and differentiate between that. Okay, so you can actually even a very important kind of a question here that can be raised is that you need to discuss what is the importance of you need to know what is the importance of having virtual IP when we talk about, or like when we want to configure hosting for multiple websites. So you can actually refer to the textbook. There is actually a good amount of details that allows you to explain this. Okay, so think of this question, and it's very important here. So examples of using virtual IP, you can link an email server, an FTP server that exists on the same server within your website. So there's actually no problem to link different, I mean, like, services that exist in the same website. All right, so here there's also one kind of limitation, same as when we talk about like the port numbers. There's also a kind of a limitation here that it is getting more expensive to get multiple physical IPs, because of course each time you want to have a physical IP, you need to rent it or like lease it. I mean, like, you need to get it leased from the ISP provider. It's because of course, so here, I mean, like, nowadays we will be running I mean, like, out of the physical IPs, and then even these kind of IPs will be kind of very expensive. Okay, so let me just take that lighter. Okay, so the most common thing here, it is the hosting, or like the, I mean, like, so this is the hosting by the name. This is the most commonly, I mean, like, hosting by the host name. It is the most commonly used one. Why? It's because it's very easy to do, it's very easy to configure, and even very easy to be practiced by even kind of naive. I mean, I'm talking about the beginners users, those beginner users. Okay, so it is just getting a single IP from your ISP, relatively, which is inexpensive. So it's only requiring a single IP, and then you can just have the host. It can host a huge number of domains with only a single IP by having a different domain. I mean, like, by having a different host name. Okay, so configuring I mean, like, that website and all these details in practice, of course, we will be having them. I mean, we'll be having them implemented through the lab. I mean, like, the lab session. So we will not just actually discuss more about this. I mean, like, the practical perspective of hosting a website. All right. So last point here in our chapter, it is about virtual directory. It is about hosting, how to host an Apache server here. So the document here, the document of a website should be in the root of the Apache here in order to make hosting. I mean, like, in order to make an application accessible from the network. So it means that, so whenever you want to have, I mean, like, any web page as a server, you want to have any web page being accessed. So of course you need to have it accessed by, I mean, like, you need to have it existed in the, I mean, like, in the server. Let me just um, um, move to this point here. So what if, now the point here, what if the document exists outside the root? So how is it possible? How is it possible to, I mean, like, to have or like host a document that lies outside the root? It is actually from using a virtual directory. So, and this is the important, I mean, like, the importance now of having virtual directory. So virtual hosting of directory, we can define it here as the process of reading and managing files for more than web server, for more than website, if these webs I mean, like, if these files that if these files exist on another, like physical server, meaning that I want to I want to communicate, or like I want to gather and integrate between different servers, so that they can share the files within each other. And like, let's say I'm like connecting to a server A here, and I want to access a page B, but page B here it's connected to, it's existed in server B, but I don't have a connection with server B. Okay, so by having a connection to server A here has to have the ability, to have a virtual directory from server B, and then retrieves that page and connect it to me here. I hope this, this kind of simple idea could be clear to you to understand. So to create here a virtual directory, you need to load in Apache here. We need to load an Apache module named mod alias, and mod underscore alias that must be loaded here, must be loaded here, and then open that that file, which is the configuration file of the web server, and look for the lines like this. So this is the kind of line that allows us to have, or configure the virtual directory. So this is just a piece of instruction that actually exists here under this file. All right, so this figure actually shows, our discussion that we have, the discussion that I was describing to you just now. It is about the ability of Apache, or not even Apache, actually, even the IIS, to host different websites and store them in different routes. Different directories. So each route here is actually representing a different directory. So here, this is an implementation, or like this is a demonstration of how different websites are actually linked to different virtual directories. And these virtual directories may exist in different, they may exist in different physical machine, but being linked to that, service, which exists on a physical machine. So it's requesting from each domain. Requests from each domain will be mapped into a particular document route here. So there are two types here, or like main types of virtual directories here, either by name-based virtual host or IP-based virtual host. You can just go for more details if you want throughout this link, but I want you to understand this basic information in the beginning, and then you can just take it a shot. Take a shot for it and go for your own self-seeking for more knowledge and more understanding in this. All right, so with that, we are summarizing our chapter here. And so we were mainly handling and talking about the HTTP, HTML as actually the main document and the main kind of scripting to, to communicate between clients and servers. Okay, so two variants here of web servers, as we have discussed. The first one is called IIS, as you know, which is actually from Microsoft, and the other one is Apache, which is even the most commonly used one and even the most dominant one. Apache is an open source and can be easily modified and mainly works in Linux, but currently also has an extension that can work in in Windows. Regarding the practical set regarding Apache, we will be actually taking this in our upcoming lab. As you will, we will just need to wait for this. Maybe within like the few coming days, I'll be briefing you about that kind of that kind of practical activity. It is very simple and straightforward, even more simpler than IIS in terms of configuration and installation. All right, so with that, thank you for listening. And if you have any question, you can just share this in our email, or you can just simply email me on my email. Thank you for watching, and see you again.